Hey guys, and welcome back to C# in Mallorca. My name is Matthew, and in the last video we went through the process of creating a C# console application. If you didn't see that video, go check it out. I'll put a link to it in the top right hand corner here. In today's video, we're going to go through the process of creating a C# Windows Forms application. It's a little different to the last video in that we'll actually have a graphical user interface to work with. We'll also go through the process of adding on some controls. We'll be adding a text box and a button, and we'll also link up the click event of the button so that you can get an idea of how to do that. If you find this video helpful, please remember, give it a like, and if you want to see more, subscribe and turn on notifications so that you can be notified as soon as the next video is available. So, without any further delay, let's get going. Okay, so first things first, let's open up Visual Studio 2019. Then on the startup screen, we're going to click on Create a New Project. Let's search for Forms in the Search for Templates area at the top of the next window. Then let's click on C# Windows Forms App.NET Framework. Then click on Next. We now need to give a name to our project. Let's call this First C# Forms App. Choose the location where you want to save the project, and then you can leave everything else as is for now and just click on Create. Visual Studio will now create all the files and the code required for your application to be able to run. You should have the form1.cs design file open by default, and you should be able to see the Solution Explorer on the right hand side here. If you don't see the Solution Explorer, you can just open it up by clicking on the menu option View Solution Explorer. If you don't have the form1.cs design file open in the main area of the screen, you can just double click on the file in the Solution Explorer. As with the console application we created in the last video, there is still a program.cs code file that you'll see in the Solution Explorer that does still contain the main entry point for our application. But in this type of project, it just opens up an instance of the form1 object for us. Just to give you an idea of what happens when we run the project as is, hit F5 on your keyboard or click on the Start button in the toolbar at the top. You'll see our form opens up and now the application is running. Let's just close the window to exit the application for now. Alright, let's take a brief look at what Visual Studio gives us with this new project. Remember in the last video, we only had the project.cs code file. The files that we get for Forms applications are a little different. Each form generally has at least two files that are associated with it. They are the design file and the code behind file. You can see both files by clicking on the expand button here next to form1.cs. Here you can see form1.cs and then form1.designer.cs. You generally don't edit this form1.designer.cs file directly in code. That file is edited while you use the graphical user interface to drag and drop and position controls onto the form in design mode. When you do that, Visual Studio automatically updates the code in the form1.designer.cs file for you, making the form design process much easier than if you had to manually write the code for the form design yourself. You can open this file and take a look at the code by double-clicking on it in the Solution Explorer. Now let's take a look at the form1.cs file, which is the file that we'll be working with the most. In order to view the code behind file, just right-click on the form1.cs file in the Solution Explorer and then choose the View Code option from the context menu that pops up. Right now there isn't much code in this file. It's basically just the using statements and the code for the code behind portion of our form object. You might notice at the top reads public partial class. This just means that this physical file contains part of the form1 class definition. This part here that is in front of the class name :form tells us that this form1 class is derived from the form base class. This relates to object-oriented programming concepts, which we'll cover in detail in subsequent videos. Then here we have our class constructor, which is basically just a method that is run when our class is instantiated. In this case, it initializes the form for us. What we're going to do is add a button and a text box to this form, and then add the code that allows us to respond to the button's click event and display a prompt to the user containing the text that is in the text box that we added to the form. So let's double click on the form1.cs item here in the Solution Explorer to display the design view of the form. Now, in order to add the controls that we want to onto this form, we need to access the toolbox. You should see this on the left-hand side of the screen in a collapsed state. If you click on the word Toolbox, it will display fully. From here, we can find the control we want to add to the form. If you don't see the toolbox for some reason, you can choose to display it by clicking on the View menu and then choosing Toolbox. Now that we have the toolbox open, we can find the first control we want to add, which is the button control. Let's click on All Windows Forms and then double click on the button control in the list. Then if you move the mouse back over onto the form so that the toolbox collapses, you'll see that we now have a button on the form. In order to change some of the details of this button, we need to modify the properties. For example, we will probably want to change the name and the text of the button. To do this, we'll need to access the properties window. To do this, we can either just hit the F4 key on the keyboard, or we can go to View, Properties window. The properties window will show the list of properties for whatever is currently selected. If I click on the form, you'll see the contents of the properties window change to reflect the properties for the form. So let's click on the button, and then in the properties window, let's scroll down to text. Let's change button 1 to read something like My Button. You'll see the text of the button on the form change as you do that. Now let's scroll up to the name property. I use a naming convention whereby the first few letters indicate the type of control so that I can find it quicker while I'm coding. So I'm going to call this control BTN My Button. Now we can move the button to a more convenient location within the form. So to do that, we just drag the button to wherever we want it located. I'm just going to drag it over here for now. Alright, now that we have our button set up, let's add a text box. We're going to go into the toolbox again, and this time we're going to locate the text box control and double click on it. Let's move it into a more suitable position as well, just below the button. Let's change the name of the control in the properties window to TXT My Text Box. Now that we have our text box and button set up, we can start working on responding to the button's click event. To do that, just double click on the My Button text box. You'll see that Visual Studio automatically creates the code for the click event for us and hooks it up accordingly. The code we're going to add here is very simple. We're just going to place code in to prompt the user with a message box displaying the text that is in the My Text Box control. So let's type in messagebox.show open brackets txt my text box.text. Something else worth mentioning is that C# is a case-sensitive language. If you don't type the code in exactly as you see it, you will run into problems. IntelliSense is very helpful in this regard though. As you start typing, IntelliSense will provide you with suggestions based on what you're typing, and you can choose an option from the list that it supplies you. This helps a lot with spelling mistakes and case discrepancies. Okay, so we've added our code and now we're ready to run the application. So let's hit F5 on the keyboard or click on the Start button at the top here and see what we get. You'll see the form open up with our button and text box on it. If you click on My Button now, you'll just get a blank prompt. But if we put something in the text box like Hello Matthew and click on My Button, we'll get a prompt with the text from our text box in the prompt. We can close the prompt and click on the cross in the top corner of the screen to close the application now. If you ever need to close or exit the application when the actual front end is hanging or is non-responsive, you can also just click on the Stop button in the toolbar. Congratulations, we've just created our first Windows Forms application. Alright guys, that brings us to the end of the video. The next video is going to be about the different types that C# offers us. The next few videos, we're just going to be focusing on the C# language and what it offers us to get us more comfortable with writing code. I hope you found this video helpful, and please remember, if you did, give it a like, and if you want to see more, subscribe and turn on notifications so that you can know as soon as the next videos are available. Take care, see you next time.